My son, my only child, declared me dead. He didn't wait for God to do it. He just took a pen and signed my life away. He told my grandchildren, my Leo, my Maya, that their grandma was gone, a sad story to be whispered before bedtime. He thought he had buried me 600 miles away in a quiet, sunny prison of his own choosing. But he forgot one thing about his mother. I have always been a woman who knows her own mind. And I was about to remind him and the world that Martha Jean Coleman was very much alive. And she was coming home. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Martha Jean Coleman, and for 70 years, my world has been rooted in the rich, resilient soil of Brooklyn. Specifically in a 3-story brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in Bedford-Stuyvesant. It's more than just brick and mortar. It's the house my late husband Samuel and I bought with the sweat of our brows and the hope of our hearts back when this neighborhood was a place people were fleeing from, not fighting over. Every scuff on the hardwood floors tells a story. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen door frame track the growth of my son Jonathan, from a chubby-kneed toddler to a man who grew too tall for the house that raised him. The garden in the back, my pride and joy, is where Samuel and I drank our coffee on summer mornings. This house is my history, my sanctuary, my anchor. And I am a woman who does not like to be moved. My son, however, had other plans. Jonathan, a financial advisor with a sharp suit and an even sharper eye for an opportunity, lives in a sprawling suburban house in New Jersey with his wife, Tiffany, and their 2 children, my grandchildren, Leo and Maya. For the past few years, ever since Samuel passed, their visits to my brownstone have been less about family and more about reconnaissance. They move through my home with the critical eyes of property developers, their conversations a low murmur of concern that always circled back to the same point: my safety. "Mom, this house is just too much for you," Jonathan would say, his voice laced with a practiced filial worry that never quite reached his eyes. "All these stairs. The upkeep. What if you fell? And you're so isolated here," Tiffany would add, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing a line through the dust on a bookshelf, a silent judgment on my housekeeping. "You should be closer to us, to the grandchildren." I resisted. I resisted with the stubborn strength of a woman who has built her own life and intends to live it on her own terms. I love my home. I love my neighbors like Mr. Henderson next door, who has lived on this block even longer than I have. I love my church, my community garden, the familiar faces at the corner market. This wasn't isolation. It was home. But they were relentless, their campaign of concern a slow, steady erosion of my resolve. They framed my independence as a burden, my self-sufficiency as a risk. The final push came on my 70th birthday. Jonathan arrived not with a simple cake, but with a glossy, full-color brochure and a solution he presented as a non-negotiable gift. "Mom," he said, his voice brimming with a manufactured excitement, "we found the perfect thing for you. It's not a home, it's a long-term health and wellness retreat. A place called Carolina Pines in North Carolina. It's beautiful. Gardens, activities, chefs who cook for you. A place for you to rest and recharge. 6 months. All paid for. Our gift to you. A wellness retreat." The euphemism was as insulting as it was transparent. I looked at the pictures of smiling seniors playing shuffleboard and felt a chill run down my spine. This was a waiting room for the end of life, and my son was trying to sell it to me as a luxury vacation. "I don't need to recharge, Jonathan," I said, my voice firm. "My life is here." His face fell, his expression shifting to one of deep, theatrical disappointment. "Mom, please," he said, his voice dropping. "We worry so much. Tiffany and I, we lose sleep over this. You just want to know you're safe. For 6 months. Just give us that peace of mind. If you hate it, you can come right back. I promise." He played his trump card: guilt. The idea that my desire to live in my own home was causing my child to lose sleep, that my independence was a source of pain for him, it was a masterful, cruel stroke. I felt the familiar pull of a mother's duty, the instinct to soothe her child's anxieties, even when those anxieties are a fabrication designed to manipulate. I looked at his earnest, pleading face, the face I had loved since the day he was born, and my defenses began to crumble. "And while you're away," he continued, sensing his victory, "I can handle all your affairs. The bills, the mail, the upkeep on the house. It'll be a lot for me, but it's worth it for your safety. You'll just have to sign a power of attorney so I can legally manage things for you. It's just a formality. A power of attorney. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with a significance I didn't fully grasp at the time. It sounded so official, so responsible. My son, the financial advisor managing my affairs. It seemed logical. I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being made to feel like a burden. The idea of 6 months without their constant low-grade pressure suddenly seemed appealing. A retreat from them, if not from my life. Reluctantly I agreed. The relief that flooded Jonathan's face was so profound, so absolute. It should have been my first real warning sign. A week later he arrived with the documents. I sat at my kitchen table, the one where I had helped him with his homework and listened to his dreams, and I signed my name on the dotted line. I signed over the legal authority to my life, to the son I had raised, trusting in the love I had poured into him. It was the single greatest mistake of my life. I thought I was agreeing to a long goodbye to my home for 6 months. I had no idea I was signing my own death certificate. Carolina Pines was exactly as the brochure had promised. Beautiful, peaceful, and utterly soulless. It was a manicured campus of low-slung buildings connected by covered walkways, surrounded by immaculate gardens where not a single leaf was out of place. The air was warm and smelled of pine needles and disinfectant. The staff were relentlessly cheerful, their smiles as uniform as their pastel-colored scrubs. My small apartment was comfortable, with a view of a man-made pond where 2 lonely swans glided in endless, perfect circles. It was a gilded cage, and I felt the lock turn the moment Jonathan drove away, waving cheerfully from his expensive German car. In the beginning he kept up the pretense. He called every week, his voice full of forced enthusiasm. "How's the retreat, Mom? Are you relaxing? Are you making friends?" I would tell him it was fine, that the food was bland and the other residents were mostly interested in talking about their ailments, but he would steamroll over my complaints with his own cheerful narrative. "That's great, Mom. I told you you'd love it." The first sign that something was wrong was the cell service. It was as he had warned me it might be, spotty and unreliable. Calls would drop unexpectedly. Text messages would fail to send. At first I thought it was just a nuisance. I soon realized it was a feature, not a bug. It became Jonathan's perfect excuse. My calls to him started going to voicemail more often than not. When I did manage to reach him, he was always rushed, his voice tight with an impatience he barely tried to conceal. "Hey Mom, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of a huge deal," became his standard greeting. The return call rarely came. The weekly check-ins became bi-weekly, then monthly. The conversations grew shorter, more perfunctory. I tried to ask about the grandchildren, my Leo and Maya, my heart aching to hear their voices. "They're great, Mom, but they're super busy with school and sports," he'd say. "I'll have them call you next week." Next week never came. I was being slowly, methodically erased from their lives. The distance of 600 miles amplified by a wall of deliberate silence. After 2 months the pension check stopped. Samuel had worked for the city for 40 years, and that pension, along with my social security, was my lifeline, my independence. Jonathan, under his power of attorney, had arranged for all my mail, including the checks, to be forwarded to his address in New Jersey. He was supposed to deposit them into my account and forward me a portion for my personal expenses at the retreat. When the money didn't arrive, I called him, a knot of real fear tightening in my stomach. "Oh man, Mom, I am so sorry," he said, his voice a slick performance of remorse. "It's been absolutely crazy at work. The check is sitting right here on my desk. I'll overnight it to you tomorrow. I promise." The check never came. My calls became more frequent, more frantic. He stopped answering altogether. I was trapped, isolated, my funds dwindling, my connection to my family severed. The feeling of unease I'd had from the beginning curdled into a cold, hard dread. It was desperation that made me call Mr. Henderson. He was my neighbor, a retired postal worker in his late 70s, a kind and observant man who had been a good friend to me and Samuel for over 30 years. I felt a deep shame in having to ask for help, in admitting that my own son had abandoned me, but I had no one else to turn to. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling when I finally got him on the line. "It's Martha Jean. I need to ask you a huge favor. I'm worried about my mail. My son was supposed to be handling it, but something's not right. Could you possibly just look and see if there's anything important in my letterbox?" Martha Jean. It's good to hear your voice, he exclaimed, his warmth a stark contrast to my son's cold efficiency. Of course, my dear. No trouble at all. I'll go check right now. A week passed. A week of agonizing silence. I tried to tell myself that no news was good news. Then one evening my phone rang. It was Mr. Henderson. His voice, usually so calm and steady, was frantic, laced with an anger and disbelief that terrified me. Martha Jean, he said, his voice low and urgent. Something is very wrong. I went to your house. There's a for sale sign on your lawn. A big, fancy one from a real estate company. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. For sale. I whispered, the words catching in my throat. No. That can't be right. It's a mistake. It's no mistake, he said, his voice hard. And your letterbox is empty. There's a forwarding order on it. All your mail is being sent to a P.O. box. I checked with our old friend at the post office. The box was opened by Jonathan 2 months ago. He paused and I could hear him take a deep, ragged breath. Martha Jean, there's more. And I don't know how to tell you this. Tell me, Henry, I said, my voice a whisper. I was in my garden this afternoon, he began. And Tiffany, your daughter-in-law, was in your front yard with another woman. I think it was one of the real estate people. They were talking on the phone, one of those speakerphone calls. And I heard her. I heard her clear as day. She was talking about the children, about Leo and Maya. He paused again, and when he spoke again his voice was thick with disgust. She said it's been so difficult for the children to adjust. Since Jonathan's mother passed away so suddenly on her trip. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I didn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything over the roaring in my ears. Passed away on her trip. My son, my own flesh and blood, had not just stolen my home and my money. He had stolen my life. He had buried me alive and was now dancing on my grave, telling my grandchildren, my babies, that their grandma was dead. The gilded cage of Carolina pines had just become my tomb. For a full day and night I was paralyzed. The news that I had been declared dead to my own grandchildren was a poison that seeped into every corner of my being. It was a grief more profound than when I had lost Samuel. His was a death of the body. This was a death of the soul, an execution carried out by my own son. The shock was a physical force, leaving me breathless and hollow. I sat in my sterile apartment at Carolina Pines, staring at the 2 lonely swans on the pond, and I felt like a ghost, an unseen, unheard entity whose life had been declared over without her consent. But I am Martha Jean Coleman. I have weathered the storms of life in Brooklyn, I have buried a husband, and I have raised a son. The grief, as deep and dark as it was, could not drown the core of iron within me. By the second day the shock began to recede, and in its place a cold, diamond-hard fury began to form. It was an anger so pure and so righteous it felt like a resurrection. My son had not just betrayed me, he had underestimated me. He had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for foolishness. He thought he had put me out to pasture, a gentle old woman to be forgotten. He had no idea he had just awakened a sleeping giant. The retreat was no longer a prison, it was a staging ground. The isolation was no longer a curse, it was a shield. My first call was to Mr. Henderson. My voice was no longer trembling. It was low, steady, and infused with a chilling resolve. Henry, I said, I'm coming home. But no one can know. Especially not Jonathan. I was hoping you'd say that, he replied, his voice grim with satisfaction. My house is your house, Martha Jean. What do you need? With Mr. Henderson's help I began to move. He used his credit card to book a one-way flight for me from Raleigh to LaGuardia, a debt I would repay. I packed a single small bag, leaving everything else behind. I walked out of Carolina Pines as quietly as I had arrived, telling the front desk I was going to visit a cousin for a few days. The cheerful staff wished me a wonderful trip. Landing at LaGuardia felt like taking my first breath after being held underwater. The noise, the energy, the beautiful, chaotic pulse of New York. It was the sound of being alive. Mr. Henderson met me at the airport, and the sight of his familiar, kind face was the first true comfort I had felt in months. He drove me back to our street in Brooklyn under the cover of darkness. My house, the one that was supposed to be mine, was lit up from within. A strange car was parked out front. They're having an open house, Mr. Henderson whispered as we slipped into his own brownstone next door. For the next week I became a ghost in my own neighborhood. I lived in Mr. Henderson's guest room, the window of which looked directly into my own living room. It was a unique and exquisite form of torture. I watched as strangers, guided by a slick real estate agent, walked through my life. I saw them run their hands over the banister Samuel had carved, open the cabinets in the kitchen I had designed, and look out at the garden I had nurtured. They were inspecting my memories, appraising my history, their conversation, which I could sometimes faintly hear through the open windows, a stream of comments about good bones and renovation potential. They were discussing how they would gut my life and make it their own. Mr. Henderson became my eyes and ears, my loyal soldier in this silent war. He was a retired postal worker. He knew how to be observant without being seen. He would strike up casual conversations with the real estate agent, pretending to be a curious neighbor. He learned that the house was being sold as an estate sale, the property of the late Martha Jean Coleman. He learned that my son Jonathan, as the executor of the estate, had priced it for a quick cash sale, well below its market value, eager to liquidate the asset before any complications could arise. And then he learned the most crucial piece of information. He overheard the agent on the phone confirming the details of the closing. It was set for the following Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning, at the downtown Manhattan office of a high-powered real estate lawyer whose name he carefully wrote down. I stood at Mr. Henderson's window, watching my son and Tiffany arrive one afternoon to check on the property. They looked happy, relaxed, their faces glowing with the thrill of their impending windfall. They laughed as they walked up the steps to my front door, the door I was no longer allowed to use. They were celebrating my death, a death they had authored. The sight of their carefree betrayal solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. This was no longer just about getting my house back. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming my name, my life, and my legacy from the son who had tried to steal it all. The ghost had watched long enough. It was time to prepare for a resurrection. Armed with a purpose that felt as sharp and clear as a shard of glass, I knew my next step could not be taken alone. I needed more than just a friend. I needed a weapon. And in a war like this, the most powerful weapon is a good lawyer. Mr. Henderson, with his deep roots in the community, knew just the person. You don't want one of those slick downtown lawyers, he'd said. You want someone with fire in her belly. Someone who fights for the underdog. He gave me the name of Ms. Annalise Dubois. Her office was not in a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, but on the second floor of a well-kept brownstone in Harlem. The space was elegant and understated, lined with books on elder law and financial justice. Ms. Dubois herself was a woman in her 50s, with intelligent, penetrating eyes and an aura of calm, formidable authority. She wore her hair in elegant silver locks, and her presence filled the room. I sat across from her polished desk and told her my story. I laid it all out: the pressure from my son, the wellness retreat, the power of attorney I had so foolishly signed, the severed communication, the for sale sign, and the final brutal lie they had told my grandchildren. I spoke calmly, my voice steady, but my hands clasped in my lap were trembling. Ms. Dubois listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on me. Mrs. Coleman, she began, her voice a rich, measured alto. This is a deeply disturbing story. But legally it is complicated. You signed a durable power of attorney. In the eyes of the law, you gave your son the legal authority to manage your financial affairs, including the sale of your property. A wave of despair washed over me. So, there's nothing I can do? I asked, my voice cracking for the first time. He can just sell my life away? I didn't say that, she replied, a flicker of something hard and bright in her eyes. A power of attorney is built on the principle of fiduciary duty. That means the agent, in this case your son, must act in your best interest, not his own. He has a legal and ethical obligation to be loyal, prudent, and transparent. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. Tell me about your pension. I explained how the checks had stopped, how Jonathan had lied about sending them, effectively cutting off my funds. I told her about the lie he and his wife had told my grandchildren. As I spoke, I saw the professional caution in Ms. Dubois's demeanor begin to dissolve, replaced by a cold, controlled anger. He isolated you, she said, her voice a low hum. He controlled your communication, seized your income, and spread misinformation about your life status to justify his actions. This is no longer just mismanagement, Mrs. Coleman. This is a clear pattern of fraud, of malicious intent, and of elder exploitation. He didn't just breach his fiduciary duty, he shattered it. The relief I felt was so profound it was almost painful. He believed me. He saw the truth. So what do we do? I asked. Do we call him? Do we send a letter from you to stop the sale? Ms. Dubois smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that did not reach her eyes. A letter would warn him, she said. It would give him time to hide the money, to invent new lies, to try and have you declared incompetent. A phone call would be a waste of breath. No, Mrs. Coleman. Your son has constructed a very elaborate fiction. He has built a stage and written a play in which you are the tragic, deceased heroine. It seems to me that the most powerful thing we can do is not to tear down the stage beforehand. The most effective strategy is to let the play proceed to its final act, and then have the heroine walk on stage very much alive. The audacity of it, the sheer theatrical brilliance of her plan, took my breath away. She wasn't just talking about legal strategy, she was talking about righteous justice. She was offering me not just a way to get my house back, but a way to reclaim my power in the most public and undeniable way possible. He believes he has absolute authority, Ms. Dubois continued, her eyes gleaming. He will walk into that closing on Friday feeling confident, arrogant, and untouchable. He will sit at that table, ready to sign a document on behalf of the estate of the late Martha Jean Coleman. We will let him get to that exact moment. The moment the pen is in his hand. And that is when we will make our entrance. She stood up and walked to her window, looking out over the streets of Harlem. He thinks he's the director of this tragedy, she said, more to herself than to me. But we're about to show him that the ghost has been rewriting the script all along. In that moment I knew I had found more than a lawyer. I had found my avenging angel. The days leading up to the closing were a strange mix of quiet fury and meticulous preparation. My temporary home at Mr. Henderson's became our command center. Ms. Annalise Dubois, my formidable lawyer, directed our movements with the precision of a four-star general preparing for battle. My role was simple but agonizing. I had to remain a ghost. I could not leave the house. I could not make a single phone call. I had to trust the plan and wait for my moment of resurrection. Our first order of business was to dismantle the legal foundation of Jonathan's treachery. Ms. Dubois prepared a formal, ironclad revocation of the power of attorney. It was a simple document, but it was a powerful one, a legal decree that would strip my son of the authority he had so grotesquely abused. This document would be our entry ticket to the closing, the key that would unlock the door to my own life. The second and far more painful task was the redrafting of my will. My old will, written years ago when Samuel was still alive, was simple. It left everything I owned, the brownstone, our savings, our life's work, to our only child, Jonathan. The thought of him inheriting the very home he had tried to steal, of him profiting from my death, was a poison I could not abide. Sitting with Ms. Dubois, I dictated the terms of my new will. My voice did not waver. The decision, though born of immense pain, was now crystal clear. I, Martha Jean Coleman, being of sound mind and body, officially and completely disinherited my son Jonathan Coleman. Ms. Dubois phrased it with cold legal finality. For reasons known to him, I have chosen to make no provision in this will for my son. The entirety of my estate, every brick of my brownstone, every penny of my savings, was to be placed into a protected trust for the benefit of my grandchildren, Leo and Maya Coleman. This was the most important part. Ms. Dubois structured the trust like a fortress, designed to protect my legacy from the greed of their parents. My dear friend and neighbor Mr. Henderson, a man who had proven his loyalty beyond any doubt, was named as the trustee. He would manage the funds for their health, their education, and their welfare. Jonathan and Tiffany were explicitly barred from having any control over the money. The grandchildren would receive their inheritance in full, but not until they each turned 25, old enough, I prayed, to understand the value of what they had been given and the truth of how it had been protected for them. Signing that new will was the hardest and most liberating act of my life. With each stroke of the pen, I was severing a bond that had defined me for 45 years. I was mourning the loss of the son I thought I had, the family I believed was mine. But I was also taking control. I was ensuring that my life's work would nurture the innocent, not reward the corrupt. I was no longer just a victim of his greed. I was the protector of my grandchildren's future. As the week wore on, the waiting became a form of torture. Mr. Henderson was my rock, bringing me food, sitting with me in the evenings, and never once letting me doubt the course we had chosen. From his front window, I watched the final preparations at my house. I saw cleaners, strangers, coming and going, erasing the last traces of my existence. I saw an appraiser walk the perimeter, his clipboard in hand. Each movement was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of how close I was to losing everything. The night before the closing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of Mr. Henderson's living room, looking at the silhouette of my own home against the city sky. Doubt, a cold and insidious serpent, began to coil in my stomach. Was this the right way? Was this dramatic confrontation necessary? Should I not just call him, appeal to the small piece of him that must still be my son? Miss Du Bois must have sensed my wavering spirit. She called me just before she went to bed. "Martha Jean," she said, her voice firm but kind. "I know this is hard. But remember why we are doing this. A quiet letter allows him to create a quiet lie. A phone call allows him to manipulate. Your presence, your undeniable living presence, is the only thing that can expose the truth in a way that he can never, ever escape. He built this public stage. Tomorrow you will take it." Her words were the steel I needed for my spine. He was right. He had chosen the battlefield. He had written the script. My only role was to make my entrance at the appointed time. I went to bed and prayed for the strength to face the son I was about to destroy, in order to save myself. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear, the kind of brilliant autumn day that usually filled my heart with joy. But on this day the beauty of it felt like a mockery. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit that Miss Du Bois had insisted I buy. "You are not a victim, Mrs. Coleman, you are a victor," she had said. I sat in the back of a taxi with her, my heart a hammering drum against my ribs. We were traveling from Harlem to a gleaming glass tower in downtown Manhattan, moving from the world of justice to the world of high finance. We arrived at the law firm's offices at 10 minutes to 10. The reception area was a hushed cathedral of marble and modern art. Miss Du Bois gave her name to the receptionist, who directed us to a waiting area with a view of the entire city. "We will wait here until I get the text," Miss Du Bois said calmly, as if we were waiting for a table at a restaurant. Inside, I knew a team of paralegals from her office were already in place, ready with documents and notaries. The text came at precisely 10:15. It was from her contact inside the firm, a young lawyer she had mentored years ago. It read simply, "They are all at the table. The signing has commenced." Miss Du Bois stood up, her face a mask of calm, predatory focus. "It's time, Martha Jean," she said. "Let's go raise the dead." We walked down a long glass-walled corridor. Through the clear walls I could see conference rooms filled with people in expensive suits, their lives moving forward in a world that believed I no longer existed. Then we reached our destination. Conference room C. Through the glass I saw them. My son Jonathan and his wife Tiffany sat at the head of a long, polished table. They were smiling, laughing with a well-dressed couple, the buyers. Their own lawyer sat beside them. At the far end of the table was the closing attorney, a woman with a sheaf of papers in front of her. They looked so happy, so triumphant, on the verge of securing their future with the proceeds of my stolen life. The sight of their carefree joy burned away the last of my fear, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. We paused at the door. Miss Du Bois put a hand on my arm. "Wait for the cue," she whispered. We watched as the closing attorney slid a final document across the table to my son. We could hear her voice faintly through the glass. "And if you could just sign here, Mr. Coleman, on behalf of the estate of the late Martha Jean Coleman." That was the cue. Miss Du Bois pushed the heavy glass door open and walked in. I followed a step behind her, my back straight, my head held high. The room fell silent. Every head turned towards us. The journey across the plush carpet to the table felt like it took a lifetime. I saw the moment Jonathan's eyes met mine. His smile froze, then collapsed. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The buyers and their lawyer looked on in utter confusion. Miss Du Bois reached the table first. She placed her briefcase down with a soft, definitive click. I apologize for the interruption, she said, her voice filling the silent room. My name is Annalise Dubois, and I am the legal counsel for the owner of this property. Jonathan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. I stepped forward, moving to stand directly across the table from him. I looked my son, the child I had raised, dead in the eye. My voice when it came was not a shout. It was a low, clear and steady sound, imbued with the power of absolute truth. The late Martha Jean Coleman, I said, is not quite as late as you were hoping, Jonathan. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Tiffany began to sob, a theatrical, self-pitying sound. The buyer's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man who understood instantly the magnitude of the fraud he was witnessing, stood up. What in God's name is going on here? He demanded, his voice shaking with rage. We were told this was an estate sale. Ms. Dubois calmly handed him a copy of my revoked power of attorney and my new last will and testament. My client, Mrs. Martha Jean Coleman, the living owner of 124 Maple Street, has revoked her son's power of attorney, effective immediately. As you can see, this sale is fraudulent and therefore null and void. I would advise your clients to seek damages. The room erupted. The buyers were shouting at their lawyer, who was shouting at Jonathan. Jonathan sat frozen, his face a mask of ruin, unable to speak, unable to move. I didn't stay to watch the full implosion. My part was done. Ms. Dubois and I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the wreckage of my son's life behind us. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal activity, but I was shielded from it all by Ms. Dubois. Jonathan, facing lawsuits for fraud and the threat of disbarment, was forced to capitulate on every front. He signed over the deed to my house, returned every penny he had taken from my accounts, and disappeared from my life. In my own home, and tried to explain. Your daddy made a mistake, I told them, my heart aching. He was confused and thought I had gone to heaven. But I didn't. I'm right here. Leo, at 12, looked at me with eyes that understood more than I wished he did. Maya, my sweet Maya, just wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, I knew you weren't dead, Grandma. I missed you. That was the beginning of our healing. My son is a ghost to me now, a man I no longer know. But I am no ghost. I am Martha Jean Coleman. I am the mistress of my own home, the guardian of my grandchildren's future, and the living, breathing proof that you can try to bury a strong woman, but you can't keep her down.